Yeah. Unleash the beat. Let the flow go. I gotta know though how we still in this predicament this many years later. The Black Panthers led the movement and now we slay the pavement, crashing it with all this tragicness that I've been seeing in my mental, so I still keep it flowing. I don't need to be no way, I just keep on growing like a seed that they planted. I catch it and keep on standing above the bullshit, cause I've been damaged from society. They've been putting cages on us since we was like 3, so I'm back again, rhyming on the beat. This I ain't. Hey, thank you for coming into Vine Tree Radio. You here chilling with the Vine Tree. It's your boy West and
Mauriwowi. How's it going?
Going good. You already know it's a good Saturday. It's sunny out here today. We're talking a lot about the Black Panther movement and how it's portrayed, talked about in the media and in music and amongst like people, today, because that's kind of been what my project is about, and something that we talk about a lot with how much actually it is in the media today. It's something it comes up for us in like the shows we watch, in the movies we see, and there's a lot to say about that today, I guess, and with the effect that has on society and the effect that has on that community as a whole and the movement. So any thoughts on this so far? Like, I know we've had like a brief thoughts on like the conversation, but like, are you excited?
I'm very excited to talk about this because, like I was mentioning earlier, I want to know I don't know where you want to start with this, but where I would start with it is, I guess, talking about like the grander scope of what the Black Panthers, in my eyes, stood for and stand for, because they're still around. They're still fighting the fight. But it stood for community. It stood for togetherness. It stood for wanting to be there for your fellow man and wanting to help ensure that your fellow man was being treated properly. And I think that is something that the land in which they live in and which we live in is something that is not rewarded very often. I think it's something that is actually antagonized regularly, because we live in a culture that is a little bit more built on the roots of, to succeed you need to put someone else down, and as a result it's created an environment where these groups are put into a world where they need to help, or these groups are formed to counteract this kind of corrupt system, this system that is not necessarily going against for the greater community, not going against the greater for the people. And so I'm excited to get into it because I do agree with a lot of what they stand for and what the fight is for community and the fight for togetherness.
Yeah, I definitely would say that I feel like it gets confused a lot of times, like what the meaning or like the message of the Black Panthers is, like over the years, at least for me, because I didn't always know about it growing up, and like as I grow to learn about it, it was always talked about in the media like a lot of different ways and portrayed different ways. So I feel like I had somewhat an idea of community like support when I was young of it, but not really. I always, like when I was young, I kind of looked at it more so like a militant group, more so like a militant kind of like focused the idea of them basis on like guns and arming the Black community, which I think was a big part of something they wanted to do. But I also felt like that at the time was maybe like my little bit jaded or limited like knowledge of understanding their movement. When I got older, I got into a little bit more what you spoke about, like the kind of like the way maybe more people that were close to them talked about how their movement was focused on community more so and the resources for the community, like how they wanted like free health. Fred Hampton specifically wanted like free health care and like money for people in like underdeveloped like a lot of stuff that you would hear Bernie Sanders arguing for today was kind of like his spiel at a lot of these places at 21 years old. And that was kind of like what led a lot of the movement somewhat. So I didn't hear about that being framed that way maybe until around a few years ago, like when Bernie was running, and I started to hear about that more so. So I feel like it is going to be interesting today to talk about how maybe when we even first heard about stuff like this and when it came into play for us, looking at it in the different ways, or was it always that way? You know what I mean?
I'm honestly in the same boat as you. When I was first introduced to the Black Panthers, at least if I'm thinking to the first time I can think of any kind of relation I had to them was definitely like in some sort of visual aspect, whether it be a movie or TV series or something. But I saw, like you said, the militant kind of look, the all black leather, they've got the berets on, the black berets and the black shades. They're looking tough. They're looking clean. But that was the image that was portrayed initially. And I think that goes into kind of something we were talking about earlier, where they were mediacized and propagandized to be a terrorist group, whilst they did go against the general idea of the government, and they were in a sense trying to overthrow the corrupt part of it and trying to get rid of the things that they felt were plaguing their society. So I do understand, if you look at it from like a super core standard, like, yes, I guess you could qualify it as that, but because there is that possibility, I feel like the opposition to them, the U.S. government and the media as a whole, went on to further push that point and try to make it look like that was really what they were fully about. You know what I mean? That was their only direction, that was their thing. And so as a result, like growing up, that was what I was often pushed, like how you said,
was even more, and that was even more able to be done at that point in time. Like at that point in time, there was no social media, so there was way more of an agenda flipping that could be happening on a group or an organization of that degree. And I feel like that ties back to, we could talk about this one first a lot, because it seems like the movie, the Judas and the Black Messiah, because even that being shown was something that's a little bit shocking to me. Like the story of this being broadcast in a movie, like when I was like even a kid or just coming of knowledge of this type of stuff happening, maybe in like late high school or like middle high school, I wouldn't think even at that point in time there'd be a movie broadcast about this.
No, I feel you.
You know what I mean?
It was definitely from like, I guess, a younger perspective. There's not been too many documentary series or like biographical depictions of the Black Panther movement that have, especially ones that have been popularized that into like the general media and like the general public, where it's become like a big thing that we can talk about it, like Judas and the Black Messiah, which was a great film and dives into whether it, some parts are, like you were saying, dramatized a bit more, as all usual,
most
films, they gotta hype it up a little bit for the movie aspect.
That's
of
why,
it.
in my opinion, I really like that part about it. But I guess that goes into the whole talk around it, I guess, because I liked that part about it. That's kind of maybe some of my end stance we'll get to. I could touch a little bit on it now, is that I guess I will say, even though some people have their debates about whether it being sold in propaganda size, like you said, it is a good or bad thing, I will say that did make it more accessible for me personally in the movie standpoint. Like seeing it displayed in this way, the story, like it was captivating. Like I kind of really had dislike for Lakeith's character or what he was doing, and I could see how this could even happen. And just like we talked about earlier, human error and flaw in people's desires and needs, and just looking at it from that base point was something that was very if it was not exactly to what the truth, it was needed to be shown in that light, maybe to see the seriousness of it, and it kind of impacted me.
It's interesting because it's a movie, so I don't know how much of it is true, especially like the way emotional depiction and the way.
But that gets thrown around a lot. We even get to when you get into Snowfall, you'll see that gets thrown around a lot. The whole inside man, like someone turning on him. Yeah,
without a doubt. But what I was trying to get at with it is that, like, you see Lakeith, phenomenal actor, he goes into such range, and so he pushes it to, he makes it really believable to what he's doing, right? And so when you look at him and you're watching this character, I feel like he starts off as someone who is a little bit more naive into, like, the grander things that are going on. You know, like when the cop pulls him over in the beginning, he's like, how do you feel about the assassination of, like, Martin Luther, about Malcolm X? What? And, like, at first I was like, why is he asking this question? But later I thought about it, and it was because he wanted to see if he said, like, that's some bullshit, like, I'm totally against it, then he was not the guy for him. He wanted to see someone who didn't really care. And so, like, Lakeith wasn't aware enough or Lakeith's character, you know, Bill O'Neill, right? I believe that was his name. He was portrayed to be someone who was not really educated on what was going on in the situation, and, like, not really fully aware of things. And so when he was first approached, he was like, oh, I don't really care about that. He's like, yeah, it's just some shit that went on. And so he's like, all right, I know that the cop is like, I know we can use you to exploit the situation because you're less likely to be converted, right? But as, you know, he goes through it, it seems that to an extent he does believe what the Panther stood for. And, like, as he goes through it, you know, especially, like, in the part where Hampton goes to jail and the building gets burnt down, and he has to go, and he's the one, like, kind of leading the charge in rebuilding it, you know, bringing it back together, getting everything kind of going again. At that point, Hampton's in jail. There's no necessity for him to be kind of still fully as involved as he is with the organization, but he's pushing it forward. You know what I mean? And then he has the discussion afterwards where he's like, if we're going to do something, because he realizes that the cops are catching up, and this is when they started kind of talking about, like, kind of scope out Fred's place, like, what's good. And so he's like, we need to, like, I think it's gonna get real. We need to do something radical. And that's when he goes up to Fred. He's like, yo, let's go blow this shit up. Like, I got, you know, he shows the trunk, and he's like, nah, I'm good. Like, that's not the wave. That's not gonna accomplish what we wanted to accomplish, type deal, right? But my point is that he was kind of progressing towards it, but the whole time, even though as much as he believed it, he was still always cornered by the CIA or the FBI, rather. For me, I think that goes back to the money idea. I feel like it goes back to a little bit of the interesting rhetoric on the whole capitalism part. Because, I mean, some degree he was a little bit like, yeah, he was naive, but I even saw there's documentaries on him, and the money played a big factor in the money that they were paying him. And I noticed that goes kind of even against, like, what they were saying, what Fred Hampton was even about, like, you know what I'm saying, and the Black Panther movement, because it was like he was kind of getting, like we all said, corrupted, even though it showed that he did align with them somewhat. Like, later on, he's like, wow, this isn't really, but that was too, like, that the money corrupted so much that he needed that, you know, in that position. He was like, I gotta, and he was in their corner no matter what. I get what you're saying, but it was almost like, I really tie that's an interesting parallel to think about. That's what made him turn, but in some sense that's even what's motivating this whole thing right now. I agree with you. Money is more often not the root of all problems, you know what I mean, when you break it down to a lot of situations, because it causes corruption. It's the root of a lot of corruption, and as a result, yes, it definitely played, like, a huge role, like, you know, the monetary incentives. And he was pushing it. He was like, look, I've got some,
you saw him getting dressed better, like, as it went on, and stuff too. It was like he was taking advantage of the situation, without a doubt. No, without a doubt. Like, he was a character that was like, I see my opportunity, because he was a hustler, you know what I mean? Like, his gig at the time was robbing cars, I'm assuming, to flip the car, you know, scrap it for parts, you know, go on to the next one type situation. But so he's given this opportunity where he's like, well, I have to do this anyways, kind of, because, like, I'm either going to jail or I got to do this. But if I'm doing this, I can get paid. And so this fool was really, like, taking advantage of that situation. And he saw that the cops needed him, right, for the info that he had, especially when he was like, all right, now I'm the driver. Now I'm more associated with the party. I have more stuff that's worth giving up. So that there was that incentive that he kept upping the price and kept, you know, taking advantage of it and living in it. But what I was saying with, like, him growing into it is like that's why I say I don't know, like, fully how much he really
delved into it, but it seemed like he was always motivated by, like you said, the money, the fact that he was facing possible jail time, but at the same time, despite those two things, like, he was kind of learning more so what was going on in the community and seeing what was going on, and he was like he was sympathizing more, he was understanding more. Not to say that
it was just like he didn't know as much, and as he got more in, he was starting to, like, just human, like the human effect kicked in, which is the same thing that kind of ended them on the both end, like that, like, flaw that, well, I'm still human regardless, I'm here doing this other thing, like, I've been around you guys so much time, I'm seeing what the struggle is, what the fight is, like, he started to understand what they were going through to some extent, because he was going through it with them. But I feel like an interesting kind of like topic we could talk about within that is the rhetoric surrounding, like, Judas and the Black Messiah, like the title of the name, because I think that's a lot of what we're talking about right now. How should we even be talking about people as like saviors and leaders? That's like the topic I feel like that kind of surrounds this conversation, the bigger conversation, because a lot of people that I know, I've had other people in the classes, and when we talk about like these type of subjects, a lot of people that maybe are more well versed in this will tend to throw that around, that we shouldn't be looking for these type of people to like lead these uprisings and whatnot, and that's the flaw within them. And I think this movie, while it wanted to highlight that, it also was flawed in its nature because of that, because it showcased that part, like the part of, well, purposely flawed in its nature, because it showcased Judas and the Black Messiah saying that no matter if he was that, there was always like the CIA within him, but which came from someone within his own camp. Like, there was basically saying that there's internal, like the oppression is internal. It's, you know what I'm saying? Like, that's kind of what I took from that, to say that we're human, so therefore whatever he was building, it was other humans building it with him. And the way we talk about him as being like, oh, he was gonna lead us and this is this and that, but at the same time it didn't follow through, because other people who he trusted, like Lakeith, within the sense, you know what I'm saying, was motivated by the opposite things that he was motivated by. And that's what they mean by Judas. Judas, like, you already know, is a traitor, obviously. So it's kind of saying like he was traitor to what his idea, I think even deeper than just betraying him, traitor to what his ideologies were, is what they really showed. You know what I mean? Like, that his ideology wasn't aligning with what everybody that was with the Black Panther movement was aligning with, because it wasn't about money, it was about the community, it was about this and that. And it showed that, like, throughout the movie, that didn't align with him. And I think that's an interesting topic to talk about, how we talk about that today in general, like in America. Like, how is that even talked about today, where it's like the idea of somebody who is like gonna make a move for money despite the group, you know what I mean, despite maybe like the communal aspect of something, being like, oh, this person, I trust in this person, they're leading us in this group. I think that's a common topic we talk about in different ways, and has good and bad context, but I feel like in this context was, how do I explain it, can be good for the Black Panther movement to show what really happened, but also can be negative in the sense to show that, like, this is not the way things progress, because it didn't progress because of a reason. And that was kind of like, I feel like the sad part about the movie, and like what gets said about it for me, is that it was a movie, but it's also a movie about an assassination, you know.
Okay, this is deep, because this is going to go into, I feel like you talked on a lot of different topics there that are really interesting, and I feel like they all kind of coincide with each other, and I think I know where I want to start with this. Is you say, or you question, why should people look up to other people? And that's a great question. And I think you mentioned,
even a better question is, do people have the ability to lead other people correctly?
That's a good question. So I think people definitely do have, so correctly is subjective.
Not correctly, yeah. I should just say lead other people. Like, do we have the ability to truly, like,
yes,
like lead other people into, yes, like doing shit?
Without a doubt. And the reason because, and I was going to say that falls into the human nature aspect, because you said, at the end of the day, we're human. You know what I mean? Yes, we are human, and as a result, I think there's like people are doubtful on a lot of things. You know what I mean? There's uncertainty in a lot of principles of life, and that can create a situation where people want to find a way to kind of settle that doubt, settle that uncertainty. And I feel like that oftentimes leads into people becoming the followers, right? When that or a mix of uncertainty, it's either a mix of pure uncertainty or a mix of pure certainty, because someone really either will really believe in what's going on, and so then that also motivates them to be part of the following. But the point being is that people are looking for something to follow very often, right? And so as a result, there has to be, like, there's a balance. There's people that need following. There has to be someone to lead them. And so there are people, and there's many historical examples of leaders in a lot of different capacities, a lot of different fields. Like, you can analyze a leader as what you can say a leader of a nation.
Well, a little bit to dive into the subjective sense of it, though. Like, what good does it do? I know that's subjective, but I think that's a little bit part of the conversation. Is people talk about, like, what good came of this?
Okay, what do you mean?
In these leaders, a lot of the critique is in, like, what good came of them, like, because in the end they turn out in whatever way it turns out.
Without a doubt, there's a lot of, with time gives more opportunity for corruption, and as they're exposed to more money, and like
that's how I was connecting it to the other point you made. I was trying to figure out what you thought about it in connection to that.
Here you can stand with this. When Hampton was assassinated, they make it a point at the end to point out how much stuff declined from that point forward, when Hampton was no longer around to lead the people. That people weren't able to be led, so there was a lack of being pushing forward that movement, and that can go across all the histories. Like, and the thing is, we talk about, you were saying it highlights an assassination, right? And even if you highlight the assassination of like a Martin Luther did so much and he did so great, but can you argue that because he died it was better, like in the sense of like it made him bigger because he died at quote unquote the peak? Did it make Fred Hampton bigger? Like, did it make his movement bigger because he died at the point where he was so, so, because you say there's, if you go further down, in leadership, and I agree with you, if you can only lead for so long before, because it is a peak, you go up and then you go down. So there's a point that you're going to start going down, and do you want
revolutionaries? And when you get into the, like, because you're right, there's leading, and then we get into like what we're talking about right now, like the revolutionaries, and like kind of like where it's like, but you're right though, in some sense, I really do feel like the impact that you make as these leaders,
there is an impact. There's 100% an impact.
There is an impact,
and it's necessary. It's a necessary impact, because without it, like, time has shown that without it, people just don't know. Because there's so much else going on in the world, and it's hard, and it's shitty to say that, because sometimes there's certain civil rights or certain like human rights or certain things that are like so much bigger than a lot of things that we worry about on a day-to-day, especially like in the first world basis. But in reality is that we all live in this world, and there's so much things that are consuming us that it's hard to focus sometimes on certain things, and unless we have someone that's pushing it in our face, like saying, yo, this is what we need to be focusing on, someone that can kind of redirect priorities, show us that, like, maybe the stuff we're focusing on now isn't what we should be focusing on. We need to be focusing on other stuff. Like, if there wasn't that, like, I feel like a lot of people would just not go through with a lot of things, or not go into certain movements.
It's true. Leaders do serve us. I mean, those type of leaders serve a specific purpose, but I think maybe our belief in them, I'm playing devil's advocate to some extent. I feel like maybe our belief in those,
it can be misguided.
it can be, I think sometimes that's the danger in them, is just sometimes our belief in these revolutionaries, like the level of belief in them can be damaging to you personally, but the awareness of them, it brings hope. And that's what I'm starting to realize. It actually brings a lot of change because of the hope it instills in people, in my opinion. Because it's like, say, if I'm aware that, oh, this person and this person was able to do this movement despite they died. 'Cause that's kind of the mindset I'm looking at it, like me being like, okay, this person sparked all this and then they're not alive now. But for me, what it does, it's like hope, because I'm like, oh, this existed. This was going on. And I see how, so the talks around that sparking these other talks, that's what I think the rhetoric around that is important when it comes to that, is that, okay, like, yeah, maybe it is just talk per se. It's not like his movement is still in actual action, but that it's not just talk, because this talk is like, it maneuvers the way in which I talk about certain topics, because I have hope within them that I could accomplish these things because they've already happened. So I think that part about it adds to it. The only other difficult part, people like say on the other end, is like, well, if the person is like not here to some degree, it's like, you know what I mean, like when they're arguing like what will
they stand, did they really stand for what's going on?
No, not that they really stand, more so just like what impact is that still withholding now, like as far as like what they did, and like as to say like him, for example, Fred Hampton. A lot of people when the movie came out was questioning even the purpose of the movie and the soundtrack coming out, when the funds and stuff aren't going like directly to communities or like underdeveloped or like free healthcare or the movements that he was kind of like pushing for in his real life.
I agree with that.
So it's kind of like, I feel like that was a big talk around it, and I think that was an interesting talk around it too, because it's like, that's a difficult conversation to have, because I am all the way for it being talked about on a bigger scale, and sometimes money is involved with that. Like when the topic becomes a movie where it's like, oh, this can be talked about on a bigger scale, more people can be aware of it. Sometimes money involves in that. It could be done the right way, but I think sometimes to get it done, they feel like, oh, we have to do it within the system. And some people, that like infuriated them to a degree, because they were like, oh, why would you do it through this system? That's not what he wanted to do at all.
That's a really good point. That's a really good question, because when you're talking about, I agree with it. I agree that it actually should, and I think it should, and I don't think it should be limited to that movie. I think that should extend to the greater scheme of Hollywood and all, like, you know, general film. Like, if you're building something that's completely based off something else, you should kind of get back to it in a sense. You know what I mean? Like, why wouldn't you, almost, in a, you know? And I think that goes to like in a very deep sense, but systemically it's not built that way. It's so that's when it gets to the point where if you really do want to change it, make it like impactful, you need to do a systemic change to it, which is the part that goes against where, you know, people that want to fight against the system, they don't want to work with this, that
can kind of like get into your bag, but we're gonna segue that one into Snowfall. Like when we talk about people working with the system and like that whole,
that's where I was gonna go with this, is that this is people are put in the or not Snowfall, but in the situation of like of like working with it. It gets to the point where, how much can you beat the system? You know what I mean? How much can you beat life? The life that we live, can you outpace? You can't outpace death. You know what I mean? I mean, to an extent, you could say like your legacy and what that's a different conversation to be had. But, you know, living life in this corporal body, like, you can't outpace it. So like, even on that basic level, like, there's no way to beat that system, right? So there's certain systems in place that are just so cemented in place that it's hard to get around. It would take like full-scale war, revolution, and like to the point where you're completely overtaking a nation and like restarting, rebuilding you know, laws and rebuilding infrastructure across the board. You know, that's what it would take to do full-scale you know, avoiding the old system and building a whole new system, right? And that, whilst it is possible to an extent, it's also impossible to an extent. Like, it lies on a spectrum to where there's so much that would need to go in, and then you're also concerned with other foreign countries. Are they concerned? Are they going to get involved? Are they going to be supporting your efforts? Are they going to get against your efforts? Do they support? You know, like when you're talking about national, you know, overtaking a nation. You know what I mean? There's a lot of variables that go into it. So when it gets to that point where it's like some things are so cemented where you can't completely make a whole new system, but you kind of have to figure out a way to work within the system. And you kind of have to wait. Then it comes to like making those laws or making the ways of figuring out the ways to do like a radical systemic change that's already existing. It's hard, but I feel like it's more doable than doing like the full scale overtaking revolution. You know what I mean? And like that's something that's just my opinion on something that like is possible, not something that I feel like people need to fully settle on and to do like, oh, they need to fully just fully dive into the system.
I think maybe to some degree a lot of the extra talk about the Black Panther movement and these little movies and their influence in government and like the damage of the black community has kind of made people feel like they can outlast it a little bit more than it looks a little bit more doable. I feel like they've kind of invigorated that spirit a lot more in the talk that I hear surrounding this topic. It feels more alive in somewhat, and even like we'll talk about that later in songs and things. Like there's a lot of songs surrounding, especially tying into the Black Lives Matter movement now that is a thing. That's kind of what I'm saying to some degree, even though that's not the same thing. I feel like that it has the depictions of like the Black Panther movement in films like this and in Snowfall have made it, like you said, well, you asked the question, how long can you like I forgot how you asked it. It was like, how long can you work with the government or something like that?
It wasn't mostly a question of how long can you. It was more a question of people are put in a position of whether, because I don't think I actually asked like a question of like how long can you. It was more of like I was going with the question of like people are put in a position where they do or don't agree with like how much they want to fight against the system.
Oh, that's what we were talking about. Like it's like how it was like the amount of time, like, and I was more so looking at it like I felt like my take on that was, I think Snowfall was a great depiction of that for me because it felt like there's some sense of like them trying to fight the system within the show, even though they're trying to play along with it. But at the same time, it's like a losing game because you're fighting it with something that was they made, like they created. And that goes back to what we're saying. It's like you want to fight this, and to some degree, to fight it, they feel like the movies and all the Black Panther media should be like, we got to put these on the biggest scale and get the most people to know about this. But then sometimes that comes with doing something that's like kind of compromising the fight, if you will.
And I mean this in like the most genuine way. And if you're gonna like, let's use the example of the drug game. I mean, like, granted, probably the people that are successful in this are not notoriously publicized. But I was gonna say,
like supposedly the guy in the Snowfall is still alive. Like he's not dead. He be on interviews as a real guy.
Well, but not my point with that. What I was gonna say is how many people are successful outside of playing with the government. In that situation, and we're talking about like selling narcotics.
I'm not extra familiar to know, but I guess I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know. Well, I would say, but if I could just kind of like assume, I would say not many. Most people that ended up not having to any severe stuff happen to them cooperated with the police. Probably.
Yeah, that's my point with it though. Is that like realistic? Like if you look back at all, like at least personally, like I love watching like documentaries on all kind of major moguls or any kind of major figurehead and leader in any kind of industry, and like that goes into like the drug, and like the watching like cartels grow, like whether it be like the Escobar, the Cali cartels, the Mexican cartels, the European stuff. Like it's all interesting how it plays because they're building an empire and they build within certain things, but you have to acknowledge also the fact that all these places, they're working within the government because you can't work you can only work so far outside the government in whatever country you're working in.
If you're getting to that big of a level, obviously.
But that's my point, is how many people are that level successful where we're talking about Franklin, right? And we're talking about in the idea of Snowfall, and like if you're
in that point in time.
Even now, like I believe, like
well, it's not.
You think you can work your way around it? Like
no,
now?
I'm just saying it's a big. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's a big difference in time now. I wouldn't compare that type of experience with the government now to the same.
I think I would 100% compare it because there's other governments. Like the thing is, you're talking about the U.S. government, but there's world governments. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know, but I'm just comparing how the U.S. government was giving it up in the 90s versus how they're giving up now. I'm not talking about the other ones.
Low key, I would I would bet good money, that the government is still actively involved in some way, shape, or form.
So you think the government is giving out fentanyl?
I wouldn't put it past them, bro. I wouldn't put it past them.
You think they found that, like how they found crack in the country, and they were like, yo, we got to get this fentanyl off to make a different war?
Question.
I mean, I wouldn't put it past them.
Question. So, do you classify cigarettes and alcohol as a drug? Legally?
I mean, I feel like those,
like on a technical sense, they are. And
I don't want to get into that whole conversation, because I understand that conversation is like, yo, I know
the government
those ones
supports
are worse.
that though. But my point,
I know that.
But my argument with that though is that that's a beautiful example of like the government clearly supports something that's put in our faces.
Do you have to be? I mean, I know the government is wrong, but I'm just saying, in my just regular brain, I always have to say this: just because are you hypocritical in that one point, does that mean like that's what, like, just because we could find hypocritical points, does that kind of like make it that, well, because they support alcohol in this and these ones should be drugs?
But what I'm saying, those are clear examples.
Yeah, I'm saying just because you can find certain clear contradictions.
Cigarettes and alcohol kill more people than
but that's not my question.
Like,
I'm not debating that. My question is that because you can find a contradiction where they're wrong, does that go across the board?
Say that one more time.
I'm not debating that. I'm saying, but because you can find a contradiction, does that mean that it goes across the board?
Well, it's not so much across the board, but it's answering this question clearly. Like the question of like, do I think the government is still doing it? Yes. Like,
that's the better question. Is like, just because they've done it once, that means, do you think they're still doing it? Just because you caught them red-handed, that's it?
They're still red-handed. Their hands are still completely covered in paint. Is my point. Like, it's not that I'm not comparing something. Like, are cigarettes and alcohol fully legal today? Are they more legal than other drugs that aren't as harmful?
I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't look at it as today, because that's not when they decided it to be legal. It's still going on today. I'm not debating that it's still going on today.
When you look at cigarette advertising, have they or have they not targeted black and brown communities, other communities of minorities?
I think this is getting away from the point, though.
But it gets to the point of the same point.
But I'm not understanding it, though. That's what I'm trying to explain to you.
That's what I'm trying to explain. That
the hypeness of it isn't making me understand it more.
Those things that I'm outlining are the government's role in playing, and the government supporting the roles of these companies doing what they're doing, right? That's full support from them. Totally cool. And that's clear in that's the stuff that they're totally cool with putting in our faces. Can you imagine what they're not putting in our faces? But
that's what I'm trying to say. I don't even like arguing this point of view, but that's like, I hate having to argue this point of view, but like, that's what I'm talking about. I don't agree with that stance. I don't think you can't imagine what they're not showing us this. What can you imagine they're not showing us? I don't think that's enough. Not to say that it is. I'm just saying that's not enough for me. Just that stance to be like.
I think there's been in my opinion, I've seen too many historical.
I don't even go by that with people where it's like, damn, he lied about this. What else could he be lying about? That's me.
All right. I feel you on that. I feel you if they lied about once, twice. But all right, say you have a friend who lies every time. You know them very well. You know that like every time you know the story. You've hung out.
Like, I could believe it, but I'm not going to really. But I'm not gonna believe it until I know.
But this is my point, right? But you get to a point where you start to you lack doubt, and you can't tell me that. Like, if you tell me that you hang out with someone who tells a lie on a daily basis, and they look you dead in the face, and they say something that you're gonna take it 100% fact, you're gonna be like, nah, I trust you.
I mean, unless I have proof otherwise, unless it's like I really know. That's the thing. I will say, for me, that's a hard one, because it really does take a lot for me to determine somebody as like, oh, I know this person to be this way. Unless I'm a very like, if you're face to face, this is how America got away with this shit, man. Because I'm very like, if there's no proof. Like, not any proof. It's just like I determined it off of that. Like a lot of people joke on me. Even my friends that I know will just tell me something, and I'll just believe them. But then it'll be they know that I'll just.
Mind Tree Radio.
Oh yeah, okay, I got it. Because we were talking about this, like, we were talking about the idea of like our trust and distrust of America, and what it takes for us to, and what it takes for us to distrust. And don't get me wrong, like, I'm not like the super trusting person of America, but I'm also not a super like pattern-based person where I'm gonna say, damn, all right, like I've seen America do this a few times. I could guarantee they probably still doing this right now. I will say naturally, like you said, that's gonna make me be a little bit more inclinated to believe that if someone told me it, because yeah, I seen the pattern of it. But I'm still a very person of like, oh, when the document come out that says this or whatever, I'm probably gonna be like, oh damn, they did it. Like I saw they did it. That's really when I make my opinions on stuff.
I feel you. I understand the need of like the validation to make, and I agree with that. Like I can't say something definitively happened until I see it happen, but I can also say when I've seen something definitively happen regularly enough, it can have an influence on my decision whether or not to trust someone.
Things for sure lead us toward a direction. In America, there's a lot of stuff that definitely lead us toward a direction of the way they were trying to run it. Definitely, people could kind of be like, yo. Like,
I think there's been like very clear examples, like all throughout the American history. I feel like, in my opinion, on like almost all ethnic groups that come in, and all group, like there's just been always a measure of wanting to keep certain people down and push certain people forward. That's been a narrative that's been like rooted in the. So if that's been something that's been rooted since then,
that's something now we could prove though as like fact now with the thing we talked about that I learned about in this class.
These videos, these documents.
COINTELPRO. Now the COINTELPRO actually, because she said even when someone asked, because they were like, "Where'd you find this?" Because I can't even find stuff about this. She was like, "Yeah, it's actually really hidden. I had to find like a PDF," and she gave us a PDF on the basically breakdown of it, because it's not something they just have for academic like.
They don't want you to.
Yeah, because it was something that wasn't previously released.
Why would they like?
It was like private, and then it was like once it realized that society was kind of like, oh wait, we don't really like the idea of you like shutting down these communities' progress. So they were like, oh, we got to keep this low key, let them know that we did this. And then it kind of was like, wait, that's even more burnt. We got to at least just own up, because now we're in that age of just be like, oh well, we did do this. This is when it was, but let's just kind of like be low key, like it's out, like it came out, like, you know what I'm saying?
Without a doubt. I think, and that transitions into two separate talks of it, because I think as a result of that, like that's a super clear indication of like a certain time period where it's like a government 100% sanctioned group that's doing these bad things.
That was like one
right?
of the clearest indications for me.
But like that mixed with, you know, laws since the 1700s, like since we were founded to even up until now, you know what I mean? Like you could see the treatment of people all throughout that time. There's been 245 years of like of the nation existing as it is, and as a result, in those 245 years, so much has happened that like there's so much happened that I get to a point where I'm at the year 246, I'm not super optimistic and hopeful that they're gonna just completely they're gonna be like, you know what, nah, fuck it, full reset. Like all of that was our bad, my B. We're totally cool now. We're like we're totally open. Like are we expecting them to really be like converts? Like have they made any kind of indication to us that they've converted in that sense?
And I guess that was one of the interesting ways the Black Panthers were woven into the fight, because while they were natural enemies of the government and stuff because of their agenda, they then, because of what you're saying, were like, well, if they kind of also did to some degree accept that, and we're like, well, we need to arm ourselves and just protect ourselves, because they're like, what do you think is gonna happen? Like, and so, you know what I'm saying, they kind of felt like it's just protect yourself season out here. Like it's not like looking at America's history, they don't really got your back, but which made them interestingly that's kind of what made their conversation have all these nuances and stuff, because they're also having to do, like you said, with the police, and because of that factor, and they want to arm themselves, and they feel like, well, we just got to deal with what we got to deal with. But then at the same time, because of their agenda on the greater scale of what their movement is about, having to deal with these other organizations targeting them and being like, oh wait, who's the head of this? We got to off them.
Mind Tree Radio.
We're talking about taking out the heads of organizations.
Yeah, and that's what COINTELPRO was essentially about, taking out the heads of the organizations that were helping the Black and like brown communities.
You take the head off the snake. That's how you kill the snake. You know what I mean? Like that. Yeah. But that's to the point that also kind of leads back into what we were talking about earlier. Do people need leaders? Yes, because without them, That's how you
Oh,
dismantle an organization.
That's true. Without them, that is how you dismantle an organization, and those organizations were on the ground to make major change because they were attracting FBI attention. So that is, I think, what the debate is. The debate is also that maybe that FBI attention was radicalized, and maybe these organizations just were just helping the community be sturdy in some sense and stand up for itself. And maybe the FBI presence was radicalized, and then maybe it wasn't that these were going to make so much movement, and maybe we should be putting the faith in just our community and our ability to mobilize when we like believe in one thing. But at the same time, the person who brings that home at times is a revolutionary. Sometimes it's someone who kind of brings that home to us, which is why I think tying it into music and media is always going to be tied into how the Black Panther music continues to spread. I think it's always going to be tied into how the movement continues to spread, because we need voices to galvanize groups of people around these types of issues. So therefore, it never could really die as long as that is kind of implemented in it, in my opinion. Even though that like it has money attached to it, like we said, but at the same time, it's art, and art lives, like art begets art. It kind of makes it live on, like, you know what I'm saying?
I agree, but I think this is where it just shows the power of like what the Black Panthers and other groups in general hope to achieve is the power of the people. You know what I mean? The more people you have, the more voices you have, the more powerful voices you have associated, you can set up things that are beyond just that one main leader. You know what I mean? Because think of governments. You know what I mean? Think of, whilst yes, there's the government leaders that exist, certain ones, if they pass, like, think there's re-elections regularly for certain places, while some other governments have, like, you know, almost dictatorship style, where they, once they're in for fucking ever until they die. But even then, when they do die, they're replaced by someone, and infrastructure is kind of kept to an extent. If the proper infrastructure is built, like, it'll survive, which is that's the fucked up part, because you see, like, say we're talking about America, right? We have different presidents each year, but even through all the presidents that we've had, granted, not many of them, not too many of them have wanted a radical progressive change into alleviating like wrongdoings of the past, but so they just furthered the systemicness in it. But there's so much stuff where that's where it gets into the talk of like systemic discrimination and systemic being put down or limited. You know what I mean? Because there's things that they build, these huge infrastructures that have so many other voices in different parts of the world, in different parts of the beast, so to say, that, you know, control different things. And so that even though certain officials can be switched out and certain people heads can be moved and around, you know, in and around, the body still functions. It almost functions without them sometimes. Sometimes it functions in a way that, like, even having these figureheads doesn't mean so much, because the figurehead isn't necessarily calling all the shots.
That's what a lot of people, I feel like, are getting at. As in these movements, a lot of times it's just this person that's motivating them, but they're not necessarily doing the work or getting it done. Or never was, really. It was just this person just kind of inspired them, and then they were like, okay, you do this and you do that. So it's kind of like people saying, like, why do we need this person when it's like this person ain't doing it?
Because sometimes these leaders are nothing more than just great speakers.
Yeah, that's what people's critique is a lot of times. Within that, the leader idea.
No, I agree, and I understand it, because think about it this way: like, it's just a great leader is just a great like someone who can convey their point really well, and if they do it right, they can, you know, rally the masses. They can tug on heartstrings. They can tug on emotions. They do it strategically. They do it, you know, with
and
intent.
For Fred in that movie to do that at 21, it's almost crazy, and it's like similar in a weird way. We can kind of probably transition a little bit to Snowfall now, how like Franklin kind of really galvanized at a young age in his community. Like, even though it was for somewhat of a negative cause, he really did kind of became like, they really identified him in that show as a leader. And I feel like it transitioned even when he had to go look into the Black Panther stuff, and when they pushed him to, because it kind of came like on the Spider-Man movie, like with with great responsibility comes, you know, like how that quote goes.
Yeah,
it felt like that. Like, it was like he was like, wow, you've been around a lot of places, and like now you have this opportunity and you managed to be the smart enough person to deal with it and kind of tell people what to do. Like, with that is going to come you learning what happens with that. And it goes to what we're talking about, that it's like that those kind of figures, while they're needed, a lot of times them rising to that point, it puts them at a detriment because they can be attacked, they can be pinpointed out, it can be, you know what I'm saying?
Without a doubt. No, without a doubt. I think part of that was to show Franklin's necessity for research, and like, I do believe that you learn, you just learn, you need to learn. And so this guy, he's in this field and he wants to see how he can better, he sees that there's relations of things going on. He's like, well, there's been times where the government has been involved negatively against my people, and I need to see how I can work with that. You know what I mean? I need to see how I can brush up, like, educate myself on this situation, because he wants to work against, or he wants to figure out a way to work with it, against it, whatever may be his own intentions. But regardless, he went in to do the studying, right? And to go learn up on it. I think that was like the big part of him being like a good leader, and good on top of that is not just taking the right to study, but taking the right to study those other big leaders in those moments, because he was like, all right, I can take away this from this person, I can take away this from this person. Whether he applies it correctly, who knows?
But that's
we have time to see.
And that's the interesting part about it, is that they do take the time to show you that he does the work to be a good leader by studying these
try and be a good leader.
Yeah, to try, like, by studying and being these other people, and they really depict them as kind of like having that. And I feel like that's very similar to how Fred was depicted in the movie, like, where you had this intrinsic ability to just be like, when people, what he said and stuff just kind of went, like, everybody really agreed with what he said, and like it held a lot of weight. It wasn't like something that people could just go on easy with. And I think this show has also added a lot of topic on the whole influence of the government and crack. And that is a lot of people say that was a big spiral off of the Black Panther movement, because that was a little bit before that. Said a lot of the dudes, like Franklin's dad was a Black Panther, depicted as in the show. Mm-hmm. So it depicts this to be the kids that are becoming adults of the parents of that era. Mm-hmm. So in turn, crack could be shown as maybe one of the major, factors that messed up a lot of those family structures. Because say you had a family that was aware of that, maybe made it out, and was kind of schooling you on what was going on at that time, then that came around and everything kind of changed. And I feel like this is what it's kind of adds, like an added bonus to this whole story, because it's like that was in the era before. And it's like that was maybe like one of the biggest events of that era type of stuff. And then it's like now you're going to one of the biggest events of this era, like crack hitting the scene. And like,
mm-hmm. It's interesting because I think because at least, we're talking about in the context of this in the film, right? While it does relate to the reality of what actually happened, or talking about the context of this TV series in Snowfall, right? Without, and then what it portrays, like the Black Panthers and the time frame of, so
this one, a lot of this,
like their kids, right?
This one is our rhetoric, on us.
Okay, what I was trying to get with that is that, like, because I was thinking about this, like, even like, the reporter says like, ooh, like the son of a Black Panther becomes the
she's extra like going in on that.
She becomes a kingpin, that's destroying the Black community, and that's like a pretty valid point to kind of point out, where it's like, yeah, like that's true. Was it a fault of because the thing was, Alton wasn't part of the crack. He wasn't. While he was succumbed to alcoholism, I believe. He was homeless, and he was indifferent. He had his own problems, but they weren't related to crack because it wasn't introduced yet. You know what I mean? It wasn't a thing while he was going through his struggles, right? But that kind of outlines the outside struggles, that because perhaps he wasn't able to further push these kind of points and maybe ethics or morals onto his son, because he wasn't able to be there for him, led to this point where Franklin went down this road. And so now he is put in a position where he is maybe hurting, he is hurting the community and so on and so forth. And maybe it's a lack of And kind of,
Oh yeah, no, you're right though. We got to talk about the talk on that. I didn't even remember that or think about that in that. I didn't even remember that or think about it in that content. We got to talk about the talk surrounding, like, say, like the Black Panther movement being dismantled and how that was kind of perceived to be like a lot of people were out of jobs, like drunk at that point in time, because they were like, nah, you're not gonna get a job, you're involved with this, like the communist thing that we got in earlier. So they kind of depicted his dad to almost be fall victim to that, like just got out the war, like was a drunk, like was kind of on some like didn't really, different vices, but didn't have no opportunities because of what we're talking about, like the way they kind of depicted somebody who would be involved in that type of organization at that time. You know what I mean? They kind of looked at him like an outsider, like the only way he could really make it in is the way he ended up making it in, like through that homeless shelter and like.
And can you make, all right, and keeping that in mind, could the argument be made that because of the dismantling of the Black Panther Party, or at least the dilution of it, you know what I mean, where it wasn't as powerful as it once was, and it was losing a lot of its esteem and
focus,
you know, it was because it was just getting shut down too hard, right?
They couldn't extend the help to everybody that they were helping, even, you know what I'm saying? Like maybe he was friends with so and so, like they showed who he was. They did the whole flashback of how he was like they got into it with someone and they thought he told on somebody.
But can you make, so knowing that and seeing that, can you make the argument, so because it was dismantled and, you know, within the context of the show, so Alton, he was put in a position where he couldn't get a job, he became an alcoholic, and he was out in the streets, couldn't be there for his son, and so now his son goes on to, you know, find this drug and push it onto his community and wreck his community, and at the same time, there's no community effort to police themselves and to oversee each other and to make sure that the community is growing, so that there's no Black Panther Party there to kind of be like, hey, what are you doing, boy? You know, like, you know, kind of step on and be like.
But you're right though, because I get what you're saying, because like showing that his dad was out for the count, kind of shows that the dismantling kind of shows
had a
like
larger effect.
Yeah, like the COINTELPRO, the taking out of the quote unquote leader, quote unquote, took out the guidance for the other leaders, and they're kind of displaying that in the show because they're saying that trickled right down into the crack era, and they were like, wait, now let's get it systematically, because it's like, all right, we already took down the head of the snake, how do we get the rest? It's like, well, there's no head of this, now we just put this here for you to grab, and you don't have no guidance to tell you not to grab it because we already took away the person who those people were looking up to.
That's very true, and
that's crazy.
It's fucked up. It's a great example of why this, you know, the government has a track record of not being too kind.
It's like some like cut you at the feet and bun back, like
it's fucked up though, but it's crazy because that's really interesting to think about it, because I thought about that kind of before, like that relation, but now as we were talking about it
makes a lot of sense, really seeing like how that kind of turned out into a lot of factors in it. And they started out the show, even when you think about a lot of the first season was a lot of drama between just him and his dad, really just being kind of like being like him really upset that was his fate and like that's what he was on, like just being like, nah, I don't come around here being like that, and then trying to like school him about that. That's kind of what led him to even look into the Black Panthers, because he was kind of upset that his dad was trying to tell him about.
That's a great point, because that shows that if there was more people like that were actively around, not, you know, succumb to, unfortunately, like Alton, that were out on the streets, away from their families, away from being able to be active members in the society at the moment, but that lack of it, because he had that knowledge of like trying to push that away, but he just wasn't there to impart it younger and have more people that are around the community imparting it on different parts of the community, you know what I mean? But that's a clear example of like the dissolution of the Black Panther Party like set the groundwork for being able to take over I
think that's probably what got him
level.
To, in some sense, turn in the end, because I feel like him having that shelter got him back into its element with the, like, it shows how his sense of being a leader kind of came back. I didn't even think about it like that, how he started out going to the shelters, and now he turned from going to the shelter to having his own shelter, and like literally being like the guy in the community that everybody comes to be like, yo, I'm on crack, I need help, like da 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 da. But that's kind of coming full circle to what he was at Israel, like a Black Panther. Like,
he's there for the community. He was there to, that's what he wants to hopefully build. He was, you know, he was taken away from that due to certain vices, and so he was just deterred from that. But when he's like,
now he's back
still,
on, he's
still
back like, oh, that's what I'm about. And that's kind of what led to him probably like turning in some sense and working with the reporter, because she kept pushing that button and he kept leaning into that role, as he kept being like more so like, man, I'm helping more and more people in the community, like I'm seeing more and more people come in off this stuff. He's kind of looking at it like, maybe this is my chance to like have that voice again and be like,
yeah. I think I agree with you. I think I agree with why he did it, but I think where his fault was that he felt like his voice was powerful enough. Not to say
and that
it
goes
isn't.
back to the whole leader conversation where it's like, do we need that? And that's what people are trying to say. It's like, is him doing that gonna save the whole thing? No, it's not.
And as a result, because it isn't, like, that was where he fucked up. That was a wrong move. Like, things like that are not to like
that was a miniature move, but it wasn't a move at the whole government where it was gonna like stop this process. And he was kind of looking at it like that. It's more negative when you believe in it to be that. Like we believe in it to be that and that wasn't what it was. It was more so just, he looked at it like, okay, this could be something, and she trying to hype it up to be that. But it's like, this is a move that it's gonna start a ruckus, but it's not gonna like dismantle it.
Yeah. No, it's
but
true.
I see how you could think it will be at that point in time, how shocking it was though.
Yeah, and it's scary because, like, you know, she's coming at him with like, hey, I'm gonna either target the CIA or your family in this story, your pick, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and he's looking at like, I gotta go out of town, this is it.
But realistically though, I mean, the thing was, he wasn't in a great place with his son, and he didn't agree with everything that was going on. But I mean, should he have sat down and at least mentioned what was going on?
Definitely.
100%. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Let other people kind of handle the situation.
Even his wife got mad at that. Like, she's like, come on, you didn't even say nothing to me and you were already like out the door.
Exactly. That was not a move for him to make on his own. And because it honestly, it fucked up a lot of things. And it fucked up a lot of things, and it's not going to accomplish what he wants it to accomplish. If anything, it's probably going to go like against what he's probably going to try to accomplish.
It might go even worse. It might make it even more complicated for everybody in the fam, because now it's like, wait, everybody knows.
Exactly. But that shows the lack of a leader, perhaps. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because he wasn't the man. He wasn't Fred Hampton. He was in a group, an organization that was led by a guy, and like we see in the Messiah, they took him out.
Crazy stuff. Crazy stuff.
That's crazy. So I think we talked about, like, I think a lot of different aspects of it. I think we could do like maybe some type of affirmation with this, because I feel like we could kind of do something we looked at in regards to this topic in our lives, like, you know, whatever point in time before, and now that we look at it differently. I know there's a lot of stuff about this I definitely look at differently. I feel like more so regarding the Fred Hampton thing. The crack era I knew, but I knew that the government and how it came in, I guess I look at it a lot more human now on that. I'm gonna add a little bit on that one. So, and I'll tie it into rhetoric. The rhetoric surrounding the crank era as a whole and it changing now, I think that also had a change on me, because at some point in time I knew that this was like a drug, and I knew that it was happening before me, but it was more so that now I realized the government's true impact. I thought their impact maybe might have just been like neglect of policing communities, or like allowing these establishments to live in certain areas when I was young. And then I realized how in depth they got into the war and the funding of the war, and that was something that I feel like is a big affirmation for me, that like, if America was willing to put aside, like, you know, whole communities, like possible progress for years, and because of the damage it could be doing for the funding of a war where their like intentions really lie and what they want and means for the goals of the country. I think that was something that changed for me maybe when I first kind of started watching Snowfall, and really was like understanding what it meant, as far as like, wow, this is going to be cemented in history. Like the same way rhetoric, like when everybody talks about budget things a bunch of different ways, it kind of cements it in history, because, you know, in fact, like all these people looked at it this way. So later on, they're not going to go back and be like, which one was really the most right? It's just like, oh yeah, they used to talk about this in this way. They used to also talk about it like this. Like, and I feel like that's kind of how, like, when I was looking at it, I was like, whoa, this is going to be cemented in history now as one of those things that's also a true opinion and view of like a real depiction of this as that way. And I feel like that wasn't always existing before, where there was like, they were like, oh, when there was depictions of it, as the government being involved, it was like, oh, this is silly, this is just made up. Kind of like with 9/11, where it's like whenever the depictions of that for a while were very like conspiracy-ish for a while, and then it changed to be like the depictions of that weren't as conspiracy-ish. They're more just like regular.
That's I feel like a great that's a huge thanks to like the internet and the ability to share knowledge and the ability to like have it, because we were talking about earlier like the a large part when we were early, like at the beginning of the pod, we were talking about like the mediaization and the propagandization of like certain of the Black Panthers specifically, but it was heavily enforced because it was run by newspapers. It was run by, you know, the news that was owned by the government or government
or
affiliates.
government affiliated where
Exactly.
they can like put influence on it.
Without a doubt, you know what I mean? And so it was so easy for them to hold a narrative, but now we live in an age where it's harder for them to hold a narrative. You know,
it's way harder. Like it's like this, like when you can put out something like this on FX, and it's like they got to put out their finesse one on like some other news channel. It's way harder.
They got to put the one that like try to spin it in like a half positive light,
on like the History Channel or something. Like, you
know, they got like the FBI character. You know, and even then within Snowfall, like you look at Teddy like as a you know, like an anti-hero, you know, where you're like half rooting for it because with his success comes Franklin's success, right?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like he's doing some pretty fucked up shit. You know what I mean?
He's kind of maybe planning to turn everybody in. He's like, I don't know, I might have to turn everyone in at the end of this.
I mean, beyond that, but like just like what he's involved in.
He's very like shady dealings.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But like my point with that is that it's still kind of
he's funding a war on the backs of
like that could be like a way and see. And that could be a great argument that maybe Snowfall, and the same thing with like you could take it with like Narcos or with like other you know,
like Breaking Bad
as well, like things that glorify the drug kingpin. The best shows, those are all those shows that we named are phenomenal shows.
Oh yeah, I've watched so many shows about how when they made the anti-hero, but that whole anti-hero idea pokes at the idea of America's role in this oppression, though, to
an extent. But what I'm saying is that like they try to, because they know that they are like a semi-victim, like these forms of media help kind of downplay it a little bit, because in all these things like you see them work with the US government, like even in, you know, like the Narcos or like the, what was the other one that I mentioned? Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad, not so much so.
In Narcos, I hate
he's not working with the government, but he's taking advantage of.
It was the worst when they worked with the government in Narcos. I hated it.
It was the thing is, it was super burnt, but that was the point where they needed to like extend it further. You know what I mean?
It looked real though. It looked like in that situation where they would have, but I didn't like it.
I feel you, and
it looked like the time you had to though.
Working with the government is always that burns everyone out. It burns me out. Like I don't want to, you know, associate myself with people that I don't like fully agree with what they do. Like it's so I understand that aspect of it, but my point being, even when we were going with that, like that these people because they had to work with the government, right? The government I feel like they help okay these shows, or help maybe green light some of this stuff that goes into like making sure that they have a character that's in the show that plays like the American as the one that's still kind of involved in the stuff, doing the stuff that was considered the bad stuff, but they playing it in a way that's like, okay, it's like he's kind of cool. He's a cool
family
dude.
Like they make you care about his. They started that with The Sopranos. That was the first one.
Exactly.
I remember I actually literally studied when it was like that came into it, because I had to like in some classes, and it's really interesting. That was the first show that like started off the trend of that, where that was really like people were like shocked to see him like strangle somebody.
It's shocking
on
but
TV. They were like, "What? Like somebody got strangled?" But then it's like
you root for them after a certain point.
Yeah,
you're like,
and
get that.
To even talk about that, like, what is the rhetoric behind that? Like us being shocked that somebody being choked on TV, but in real life, like all this other stuff that's happening, like is really happening, and it's like, but that's
that's kind of where I'm going with it. Where like they use the media, they're using these forms of media and stuff to kind of make it like try to soften the blow in a sense.
That's the whole rhetoric. That's the use of media as rhetoric, and that's why it kind of works even within this sense to get people more about it, because right there they used it to even get to this point. Like we wouldn't be able to have shows like Snowfall and so you're saying like this if they didn't already kind of put a spin on that rhetoric already. And that makes 100% sense how you were like, I see how you interpreted my first point now, like to say like that's the that got us to that point in the very beginning point. Like that whole anti-hero part about it is like we wouldn't have characters like Teddy if it wasn't for characters like the dude in The Sopranos, where it's like you really like him and you kind of like, but then it's like, I don't know.
You're like half rooting for him. You're like,
he's like the bad guy.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
You know, even think of like or a Ghost. You know, like think of like Power and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. I like this one because
like you're like, yeah, he's supporting his family, he's doing his thing, but at the end of the day,
the
you're
government
like,
aspect of this
shit.
one adds like a very cool thing, because I feel like everyone knows that like people be in positions because of like government, a systematic oppression, but I think in this one it was way more direct. It was so much more so like that was the epiphany for me, at least on the affirmation point, like how direct it was, where
it's
it was
scary.
like, wow, like the communities was kind of all right. Like he was going to school, like was making little moves to go to college, and then it got really fucked up because everything got so much money. Like to think about how much money people had though.
That is true.
That's how it got messed up though. It got. Remember when Jerome just was riding around and like, and had the speaker store,
yeah,
and all that stuff, where he was just like, bruh, they had money at that point in time. But that messed everything up because it changed the dynamic of everything. That time I testament to the dynamic changing.
All right, you want to hear? This is an interesting thing. They had money, but why did they have money, right? Because the people in the community are spending their money, so to give it to them, right? Which, like, seeing the flow of it, you see how these drug dealers are so, or like these kingpins or these fools that do the thing. They have so much money, but the people that are their customer base are so poor. That's what like the more money that Franklin and Jerome make, the more that they pull in is the more that they're pulling away
scary.
from the
like,
community.
The way they depicted
in that sense,
the way they depicted is scary at that time. It was like it was way past the demand was way past the need, if you will. Like people were like running and stealing everything because it was like whatever that was doing to you was doing it to you in a way where it was like people were figuring out a way to get the bands. Yeah. Like, and that's sad, bro. It's like crazy. Like Wanda's character. Like there's all these different characters. Like Wanda's character in the show that's like,
she's bringing it back though. I see the show painting it in a way that they're trying to.
It's so cool. I feel like everyone has a lesson. I feel like everyone's story is kind of to teach a different thing that I'm seeing in the show. And this is getting to a different side of the rhetoric, but it's very interesting because like hers is to show that side about it, like the real like addiction part about it, and like what like that did to people on that end. And I think her story will really show that as a whole, like what maybe an addict of that time came out and like did after they recovered that and But she might even link up with what's her name? The cop's daughter. I want to know where she's at. I think she's gonna come back.
Oh, I feel you.
What's her name?
Yeah,
Melody.
Mel, yeah.
Melody. I think her and Melody are gonna link up now that she's sober.
I could see that. I think they're definitely gonna bring her back.
And I think she might help. Wanda might help her because she knows a lot about what's going on and she's gotten her back in her right mind. She's not like
Wanda should have been a little quicker with getting to Franklin about that reporter girl.
Yeah, she looked sus. She looked like she was about to get into some shenanigans. Like she had the little Wanda look like I'm about to go tell somebody else. Like
maybe.
But yeah, I think so. You want to get into the music segment now, or do you have a life affirmation?
I did have a life affirmation.
Let's get it.
I am a revolutionary, bro. When that line hit on the movie, genuinely, like speaking, like I was like that gave me chills. There's few things when I'm just naturally get chills in life, like it hits you a certain way when you're like, oh, this song is different. Oh, this word, like what was just said is different. You know what I mean? Like it hits you in a certain way, right? And genuinely speaking, like that part of the movie was so well shot, so well put. Like the repetition, like the I am a revolutionary, I am a revolutionary, I am a revolutionary. Like it almost like half gives me chills right now, like just thinking about that moment. And then that was just then, right? And then they ended the film with like a real clip of Fred Hampton saying the same thing, right? And that like kind of reinforced. I was like, holy shit! Like it was dope seeing like the film pull that emotion off, that they were able to get it, imitate that real thing to kind of get that emotion from me.
It's good to see what the real thing was like, because that shocked me too when I saw the real thing, to see how powerful, how similar it was, and how much power was really in that. Because like, you know, like you said, they depict movies a certain way every time because it's a movie, but that was a moment, like you're saying, where you looked at it and it was like, I see why they had to try to depict this like the way they did, because it looked like this in real life. Like what?
Like that as well. But like focusing on that, but kind of more so into the phrase. Like that phrase alone in that moment and in the moment at the end, like it hit both, like they both hit, and like in the sense that like it just, I don't even know how.
I can't imagine being in that time, like right there where he's just like, I am revolutionary. Like imagine being like that. It'd be nuts, bro.
Like it's like honestly, like since I saw that film, it's been like a little flashback moment that kind of pops in my head, and I'm like, I got it. Like it has to be something that I need. Like I need to take. I don't know what I need to fully take away from this. Like
sample.
That as well. Like I've already thought about that without a doubt, but it was more so like the feeling I need to know how to apply that in my life, because it felt powerful enough and it's hitting me in a way that like I don't fully understand it yet, but I need to see how I need to. It's one of those things. Huh?
Get a tat? I'm just kidding.
Maybe, bro. Like fuck, that'd be kind of hard. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a hard tat.
But I don't know. It's just one of those things where you hear or you see something and it resonates with you in a certain way, and you're not sure just yet how it hits you so hard, but it's like it's just something I need to like think more on and think like how can I fulfill, you know.
So maybe somewhat of a mantra, because a lot of times people find little things and they feel like that could be a little mantra I rock with. I've been on that lately, and I think that's something cool. That would be a cool mantra, I feel like, to just kind of remember. Like if I feel like this about myself, it's something I got to tell myself sometimes in the mirror, like, yo, wait, I am, like, this is you.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. But yeah, so that's
cool, man.
That's something that's been rocking with me.
So yeah, I think on that note, I think we kind of covered a lot of the topics that we need to cover.
I had a good talk today, bro. This was a good one. I like this.
Definitely.
one.
I think we could just add for a little. I don't have too much to say on the songs, but I have, at least I can go over the list of them, and I can talk a little bit about some of them I have, because I did pick songs that reference Black Panther movement and Fred Hampton for the end of our podcast listening. And I think my one that I will talk a little bit about, I guess, is just Crack Music by Kanye West in the Game, because I know that this song, for me, before I even knew what was going on, they mentioned stuff like this, and it was very important to me to hear those lines as a kid, where he's like, it was like, who stopped the Black Panthers? He's like, Ronald Reagan cooked up an answer. It was very like, I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that it was like almost wrong to say. But that goes into now that like somehow the rhetoric had pushed me to think that like saying that Ronald Reagan had purposely got rid of an organization was like wrong or whatever. It was like not true or something, you know? And yeah, like essentially these are one of the first songs that did it.
Mind Tree Radio.